you'll please stand and pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Introduction of commissioners and staff. We'll start on my left.
City Member Tom.
Jim DeMartini, County Member.
Terry Withrow, County Member.
Amy Bublak, City Member.
Annabelle Gammon, alternate public member.
Kristen Olson, Supervisor, County Member, I guess.
Great.
Javier,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Javier Camarena, Assistant Executive Officer.
Rob Taro, LAFCO Counsel.
Jennifer Goss, Commission Clerk.
Okay. We should let everybody in the crowd too, right? Okay, we're going to open the public comment. For anybody wishing to speak, please come forward and you can address us, and if we can steer you in the right way, we will. I see nothing happening. Great. Okay, closing public comment. Moving on to approval of minutes. Everybody have an opportunity to read them?
Yes.
And?
Motion approved.
Got a motion? And a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. All right, passes unanimous. On correspondence, anything specific you want to talk about? Okay. Declaration of conflicts and disqualifications, looking left, looking right, and there are none. On to consent items. We have one consent item, and if anybody in the crowd is here for that, we could let you come up. No. Okay. So what's the will of the commission?
Move to approve the consent item.
So moved. Yes, you do.
I think it needs to be a
Okay.
regular member.
Sorry, has to.
Sorry, say that again?
I think it
Oh,
needs-
I'm an alternate.
Yes.
That's right. Awesome.
Thank you.
Good practice, so.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can we have a second motion?
I'll second.
We have a motion over here.
No.
a second.
I'm sorry.
All right, thank you. With a motion and a second.
I said second.
Well, I didn't know. Well, she had made a motion that she couldn't. So we had to get a first motion and a second motion.
Oh, yeah, they weren't talking about you.
Yes. No, you're good.
Okay.
No, you're good. Thank you. Okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. All right. And it passes unanimous. On to other business.
So tonight I have an informational item for you. This is Unincorporated Islands inventory and update. There's no formal action being requested of the commission tonight other than acceptance of the report and also discussion. So the purpose of this report is not only to provide a basic inventory of unincorporated islands, but also review our current LAFCO policies, state law, and to make the commission aware of some recent and potential legislation affecting island annexations. Brief background, LAFCOs were created in 1963. The goals of LAFCO generally are to discourage urban sprawl, encourage logical and orderly boundaries, and to promote the efficient provision of services. These are reflected in the laws governing LAFCOs as well as our local policies. Since the creation of LAFCOs, there's been also a focus on eliminating islands or corridors of unincorporated areas as well. So when we're talking about unincorporated areas, for this report, I wanted to clarify that islands, true islands, are those that are completely 100% surrounded by city limits. Those are without argument islands. We also get into state law describing islands as being substantially surrounded. We don't currently have a definition for substantially surrounded. So just for informational purposes for this report, I've highlighted areas that are at least 90% surrounded. Those would be very likely to be considered islands for our purposes. Also included in the chart that you've got are areas identified as pockets, and those are areas that are substantially developed within an unincorporated area that could eventually be surrounded by a city's limits. They're a little harder to define. The state doesn't have a definition for them, and our policy doesn't have a definition for them either, but you'll see that term used a lot, especially in our county. We do have a lot of areas that are sort of hard to define as anything other than a pocket. So the inventory identified 23 islands that are 100% completely surrounded, and those are in Ceres, Turlock, and Modesto. 6 areas were 90% surrounded or more. And then there were 8 areas that we would consider pockets. They were kind of leftover areas, particularly if you had gone through and annexed those islands, you would kind of be left with those as the remainders. There's maps in your packet as well, and these are all probably very familiar to you in your roles, having worked for or having been council members or board supervisors. You probably see these maps come out every now and then. The county at one point produced a fairly large inventory of all the islands in the county. We went through and identified them just with those definitions that we had, the 100%, the 90% areas, and then also the pockets. So these are all in your packet. This is Turlock's areas. We've got a few remaining that are 100% surrounded. North Modesto and a little bit of Riverbank. Riverbank, we're considering that remainder area in the southeast to be a pocket. It was, I think, in the over 80% surrounded. And then there's a couple areas in North Modesto that are still either 100% surrounded, like you see there on Coffee Road, or a little area off McHenry Avenue. And there's even an area in Oakdale. You're probably familiar with this one too. It's Tioga Avenue. When the last annexation went in that was nearest to that, those residents wanted to be left out, so that's why you see that area, little unincorporated area there. So just reviewing a little bit of what state law has to say about islands. First and foremost, it prohibits creation of any new islands. That one's pretty obvious. They do have a specific finding that you can make as a commission. If you do want to create an island, you basically have to prove that by creating the island, you're doing so that you're not preventing logical development for the rest of the city. In other words, you're not letting that one island hold up development for everything else. So there is an exception, and I believe it's probably pretty rare, but there is an exception in there for the commission to make to actually create an island. I don't believe our commission has used that. There's some streamlined annexation provisions that we're going to get into. The intent of those is to streamline an annexation in such a way where there's no protest hearing or election by the people, and there's also either very little or no discretion from the commission. So if a proposal comes into the commission and meets that set of criteria, not only does it have to be approved by the commission, but there is no protest by the residents and no election by the residents. It's pretty much an automatic annexation at that point. So this is a summary of those criteria. One is that the city must be the applicant and apply via resolution. It must be the whole island. It cannot exceed 150 acres. Must be substantially developed or developing, which most, if not all of ours, would meet that. And cannot include prime farmland, and will benefit from the annexation, which I think you could argue most, if not all, would benefit. So then this is a section that goes on to say the commission must approve any annexation, any island annexation initiated by the city for areas that are substantially developed, not prime farmland, and designated for urban growth on a city's general plan. It's actually a little shorter criteria list, so this applies to an area that would be larger than 150 acres potentially. The commission's discretion would be fairly limited in that case. So our commission has our own policies that we've adopted locally regarding islands. The first, Commission Policy 17, generally reflects state law. It's almost an exact copy of state law, actually, for streamlining island annexations. But it also says that the commission will define substantially surrounded on a case-by-case basis with projects. So the commission has already stated that it's not going to make a set percentage like some LAFCOs do, where they say, okay, if it's at least 60% surrounded, then we automatically consider it an island. They're all going to be case by case, project by project, and so far that's made sense because you really don't know what boundary they're going to propose when they come in, especially for those pocket areas. So it's a little hard to determine right off the bat with a percentage if it's going to qualify as an island or not. Policy 20 describes some of the factors that the commission will consider when favorably reviewing a proposal. This is really focused on logical boundaries. projects that will eliminate existing islands or corridors are stated that they're preferred by the commission. Staff uses this policy a lot when we're trying to promote an annexation to also include maybe a leftover area or a right-of-way or something to make the annexation logical and to take in as much area as possible to maybe clean up a boundary. So you'll see we've actually done annexations where it'll be the project area and then a little tiny strip of land just to make the boundary logical, maybe to clean up a previous annexation that didn't take in a whole area or didn't take in the whole side of the road. So we actually use this pretty commonly, almost with every annexation. Just some other policies that we have on the books. One encourages infill development just generally. The other one is regarding sphere of influence policies. They kind of match in the sense that you don't want to have a sphere that's also going to encourage the creation of an island or be illogical in and of itself. So now this is when we're getting in. We're going to switch over a little bit. I gave you kind of the background, gave you the existing state law and our policies, and here's where we get thrown for a loop a little bit. So we have some recent legislation known as SB 244, and you might be familiar with it when you hear the term disadvantaged unincorporated communities. We've been required to incorporate that analysis in all of our municipal service reviews. Cities need to include that in their general plans, and the county is also required to identify those communities in their general plan. Not only do you have to identify that there's a disadvantaged area, but you have to identify the services that it's lacking, how you think those services could someday be met, and you need to discuss, you know, if it's in a sphere, if it's out of a sphere, if it's an island. We do that for all the reports that you see recently. For us, that's one of the considerations of whether or not there's a disadvantaged community in the area. The majority of our islands, as you probably know, qualify as a disadvantaged unincorporated community. There's a few exceptions. So with SB 244, there's an extra provision in there that has updated the law to say that if you're annexing an area of greater than 10 acres that's adjacent to a disadvantaged community, you must also include that entire disadvantaged community in the annexation. So we're going to show an example here of how that's affecting some of our proposals, but essentially, if you're wanting to chip away at an island and it's at least 10 acres, SB 244 would require you to take that whole area or show that the people in that island are opposed to it on a majority basis. Last year we had some legislation come across our radar that actually would have expanded kind of the basis of SB 244 to make it not only apply to annexations but extensions of services. So for a city that is maybe serving water or sewer and it's adjacent to a disadvantaged community, it would have required that city to have a plan for the immediate provision of services to that community as well. It did not pass. In fact, our LAFCO wrote a letter in opposition to it, partly because it would basically ruin any efforts right now to serve maybe a neighborhood that happens to be a portion of an island or happens to be adjacent to another community. That city might not even find it feasible to serve them if they need to serve the rest of the community at the same time. So getting into the scenarios, some of them that we've been seeing lately, I gave you kind of a little history in your packet that showed that, you know, over the past 10 years, we've been averaging about one annexation a year that chips away at an island. It's pretty common for us to see, mainly because you'll have a property that is, you know, vacant and underutilized that somebody wants to develop. They'll propose to annex it, and there'll be no interest from neighboring property owners to be included in that annexation. So our commission has been very receptive to allowing someone to chip away at an island as a step-by-step process. So like I say here, current policies prefer annexation of the whole island, but they do allow to chip away at an island size. So the example I'm giving here is kind of what we're seeing now with the way SB 244 is complicating matters. This is actually based on a real-life inquiry, although I've made it anonymous and generic enough here where it's actually kind of universal for islands that we have. The little red area, that would be the proposed project. That would be, you can envision that as maybe like a 3-acre vacant parcel that somebody wants to develop. And imagine that the rest of that unincorporated island right now is already developed, and so this is an infill project. You can also imagine that the rest of the island is disadvantaged. So as a general rule, when somebody comes in with a proposal that's not adjacent to the city, we look for a way to make it contiguous and make the proposal take in as much as possible to try to make that boundary logical. So if they came in today, we would reiterate to them that the first preference of the commission is to take the whole island. It's probably not feasible, either based on the need for upgrades to the area. There could be other people in the island that are completely against the idea of being annexed. The city might not be in favor of it themselves. So what tends to happen is we look for the next logical boundary, which in this case could be cutting it in half or cutting off the corner, but taking in more than what just that red project box is there, just that property. So in this case, and it is kind of a real life example, what happened was, in doing so and making that boundary logical and making the proposal logical, they would need to take more than 10 acres. They would trigger SB 244. So in relaying this to the applicant is saying, well, no, I don't want to take on that large of a project. My project is just this red boundary. So then we have to look for alternate ways of, okay, how can we make this work, without basically ruining the project. The other scenario that we've run up against is the number of criteria that need to be met. We had an example come in where just 1 or 2 of the criteria aren't quite met, and they must meet all of them. So the one example we had, it was very clearly an island, completely surrounded, almost completely developed except for one parcel, and that one parcel was considered prime farmland. So blew it out of the water. That's no longer considered an island, at least for the streamlined criteria. We see that happening too with a few of our islands that actually exceed the 150-acre limit. They also do not qualify for streamlining. They also cannot be reduced to make them qualify for streamlining. There's a provision that prevents them from doing that. So while the intent is to hopefully make these meet the criteria, it's not always the case, given the vast number that they need to meet. The other thing that we've been seeing, and I've been mentioning lately too, is the use of out-of-boundary service extensions. And these are really the exception to the rule. Most that we see are for existing development, and it's a health and safety reason, and the commission is very receptive to those. The more difficult ones that we've had are for new development in an area where annexation is preferable. Our policies right now require the property owner to sign a consent to any future annexation, and we do that pretty regularly, although we don't have any time frame for when that annexation could occur. So kind of the workaround, the exception, the out-of-boundary, just in and of itself might be preventing eventual annexation. It kind of takes away the incentive to annex if you're already receiving the service. So kind of wrapping things up here, looking at LAFCO's role, in as much as our policies encourage island annexation and the state law is doing a multitude of things to try to encourage and sometimes maybe force annexation, LAFCOs themselves cannot initiate an annexation. Annexations must be initiated by resolution from the annexing city or petition of the residents. So you need to have, 1, a willing city, and there's very little incentive there, and then 2, residents that are also in favor potentially of it, which in many cases we've seen where annexations have been proposed in islands, we tend to see neighbors who are against being included. So looking further into LAFCO's role of what we can do, as staff, we provide technical assistance, particularly to the cities, when they're looking at a proposal that involves an island. We try to coordinate with them early. We're hoping to improve a little bit more of the outreach and sort of answering the frequently asked questions before it gets to either council meeting or the LAFCO meeting. We also want to double check and ensure that our local LAFCO policies are conducive to island annexations. It's difficult given the constraints that we're in with the state law, but there are probably some areas where we could maybe clarify or do a little bit more to encourage openness when looking at the criteria themselves to hopefully get some more streamlined. And then also we want to make sure that we continue to support legislation that provides incentives or reduces impediments to island annexations. Particularly, I would say over the next couple of years, we'll probably end up seeing more as the trend goes on of legislation that is either attempting to force a city to serve or force an annexation when it's a little early and services haven't actually been coordinated yet. The county and the city maybe haven't had an opportunity to coordinate yet. So we'll be paying attention to those, and LAFCO has those on the radar too, so we'll share updates with you as they come. Other than that, I leave it open to discussion. Really the purpose of that was to make you aware of some of the struggles that we're having on our end of resolving kind of the purpose of LAFCO with the constraints that we have.
Great, thank you. Anybody have any questions?
So, Sarah, is the SB 244, is that what it was? Is that dead now? Is that just, or is that still just sitting out there somewhere?
That was actually approved and effective.
Oh, I thought,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry, I missed that completely then.
The Disadvantaged Unincorporated Communities law, that was effective 2012. That's the one that requires annexation if it's more than 10 acres and adjacent to another community.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to show you how the disadvantaged communities, how many of them there are, the entire city of Ceres is a disadvantaged community. All of it. So it's easy to make it. It's just 80% of the average income when you consider, like the Bay Area and all that, compared to here. The whole thing's a farce.
Any other questions? I have a legal question. The discourage, for legally, that word kind of gives you a lot of wiggle room, correct?
It depends on the circumstances, but yeah, there's, I suppose, more than one way to discourage something.
Okay. So a mandate, I mean, thou shalt, they will, but
Right.
discourage says we have a little leeway, correct?
Again, it would depend on the exact situation, but you're correct that it's not mandatory as in shall. So discourage means what you think it means. When there's no definition in statute, it's the common meaning of the word. But right, there's different ways. I suppose there's different degrees of discouraging, so to speak.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I guess my question is, and maybe a little background, so I have a long-standing frustration with our unincorporated county islands in our community, which is why I was the only Republican in the entire legislature to actually vote for SB 244, because it has appeared, in my experience, that nothing else has been working. Because we are, for the most part, short of Shackelford maybe, in the exact same area that we were in 12 years ago. So it seems that we have to do something different when what we've been doing hasn't been working. So I guess my question is, while LAFCO can't initiate annexations, is it ever called upon to facilitate conversations or facilitate momentum when it comes to cities and the county working together to annex an area? I know Shackelford's a great example of, I think, what should be possible more often, but or does LAFCO just sort of take a step back until and unless a plan like that is ready to come to the board?
I think it depends on, well, it depends on what we know and how we're approached, but like there's two right now that are projects that we're aware of that are in island areas. And so on the staff end of it, we've taken the approach of we're working with the city right now to see, okay, what is the likelihood of the city supporting this entire island? Because our policies support it fully. And by the way, it'd be approved because there's nothing holding it back once it gets to LAFCO. So what can we do to try to get this whole island? So we definitely try to work with them early on before they start working with an applicant and telling the applicant that absolutely not, the city's not going to support it. We look for ways to at least say, hey, if you are taking in this whole island, here's what we can provide you.
Mhm.
It's streamlined, it's going to be done. So what do you need from us, to help you out?
And could that ever involve helping them access grant opportunities to make the cost come down, or is that beyond LAFCO's scope?
It would be more if we're aware of them, we'd certainly be
Okay.
willing to share. Yeah.
Okay.
There's
All right.
resources out there.
Thank you.
So I'm sorry, what I was looking at, well, I guess was the proposed legislation.
Oh, yes.
That's, sorry, that LAFCO didn't support, is that right?
Right, and that one did die.
Right, okay, and so that's the one that's not going to, it's not out there lingering around, that's going to come back.
Right.
Because that really does provide a kind of disincentive for these areas to be incorporated, just taking a little bit of the time as they can. Okay, sorry, I'm there now.
Yeah.
On the service extensions, one of the issues, in Oakdale is, well, just use Tioga, for example. Their wells going dry, or there's some other areas in East Oakdale, they're having, OIDs trying to get out of the water business, leaves only Oakdale for water business. So, when I was reading this, it seems like they're kind of pushing, hey, if you're going to do a service extension, you really might want to take a second to say, well, you might want to just annex. Is that a discretion of this body to decide, we're not going to allow that because we think there's only 20 homes, you should just annex instead of piecemealing extensions?
Definitely. In fact, that is one of the considerations. The out-of-boundary being the exception to the rule, the commission could, in theory, deny the out-of-boundary and say, we want you to come back with an annexation. The commission could say that it's not appropriate. The commission has given me the authority to approve when it's an emergency health and safety, and the typical example of that is when you have the single-family residence where the well is dry and there is no other, there's no other option, and maybe annexation doesn't make sense. So we've seen a lot of those too, where it's not growth-inducing. Those don't typically come before the commission, but I could see, the other ones where it's an entire neighborhood and the area-wide approvals that the commission will want to look at.
Because it seems like, and it's not a case there, but with the new septic tank regulations, the wells going dry or quality issues,
Yeah.
you get in a bind because now you're talking about two different service extensions, a sewer and a water.
Mm-hmm.
You're 60-70% there, right, for this neighborhood. I guess you'd have to put sidewalks in and bring everything up to code, but at some point, I was wondering how it looks like the state's pushing more down the road of no extensions without annexation as we're going along here. Is that fair to say?
That's what it seems like, and especially with water. There is a provision right now where if you have a mutual water company or if you have a struggling small district, the state can actually come in and force you to connect to the neighboring municipality even. So we're trying to look at how that's going to impact potentially some of our cities and districts as well, being forced to serve maybe a mutual private water company right now that's serving a mobile home park, say. That could be something that happens out of LAFCO's realm even, that goes beyond us.
So in other words, the city would almost be
Could be forced.
blackmailed or forced into saying, hey, we're not going to, you have to take, and the residents would have to take the annexation to get the water.
Right.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments?
But,
If not-
I would say that the cities, when they annex, they require all kinds of other things like storm drains, and sidewalks, and curbs. And, it's not a cheap thing to annex an old island, as we found out with Shackelford. I think it cost the county $9 million to do that. And I remember asking Ceres, why don't you annex the North Ceres area? The answer was, as soon as you put in the sidewalks and the curb drains and all that, we'll consider annexing it. So there's a lot of obstacles to annexation, and there really needs to be a little bit lower standard to annex a 50-year-old neighborhood there. There should be some leeway there. You just can't bring it up to new standards. There's limitations there, so the cities really should allow something, a lesser standard.
We were waiting for the county to help out with money.
I agree. I feel that way.
We could print some up tomorrow.
Any other questions or comments? If not, I'll open it to the public. Public is quiet. All right, close public and come back where it was just informational, so we can proceed then?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioners' comments? Anybody? All right, additional matters at the discretion of the chairperson? I have nothing. And executive officers report.
So upcoming on the horizon, we have another out-of-boundary application and also a detachment application from the Del Puerto Water District. Those are both in the process. We're working on municipal service review updates for the Turlock Irrigation District and the Riverdale Park Tract Community Services District. I want to let you know that the recruitment for public and alternate public member was posted last week, and applications are due March 20th. Let's see. Oh, and I'm supposed to remind you, too, if you haven't done your Form 700 yet, please do so. We'll probably remind you of that again, too, before the actual deadline. And that's all.
All right. Then I guess I'm looking for someone to move for an adjournment.
Adjourn.
All in favor, say aye. Thank you, everybody. Meeting is ended.